right, welcome back to Shoot Punch Kick, where three former street vigilantes from Brooklyn talk 80s and 90s cinematic mayhem. I'm Telly, joined as always by my fellow misunderstood outlaws, Carlos and Dash. How you guys doing?
Excellent.
It's a great day. 40 years. Happy birthday, Terminator.
40 years, yes.
Terminator's got to get a prostate
40.
exam.
Yeah. Well, speaking of 40, so this is a very special episode of Shoot Punch Kick. We're celebrating the 40th anniversary of The Terminator. So we're flashing back to 1984 to break down a sci-fi action classic and a game changer for the genre. So let's talk about personal histories with this iconic film, starting with Dash.
So this I saw after Terminator 2. So for me, this was a prequel, and Terminator 2, once I saw it, I was like, this is the best film ever made. Probably still hold that same opinion. But I got into a really big Arnold Schwarzenegger binge right after that, and I've rented it on tape. I don't know why I didn't rent this one immediately after Terminator 2, but just seeing him in a completely different light, an actually like terrifying movie, because I was probably like 7 or 8 when I finally saw this. And this movie changed my life.
This movie changed your life.
I just feel that this movie really did all of the things you think about when it's Terminator 2, like all of the under the hood stuff and philosophy stuff and implications really come from this movie and not Terminator 2. But they're so close together, and I feel like they tell like one story that, I'm going to include them together. And also I saw them in such a short amount of time to each other. But this one is really just I thought about it like nonstop because of like all the time travel implications and the way it was like a game changer for me, like in terms of movies, probably more than Terminator 2.
Okay, Carlos.
Wow. So my history with Terminator 1 specifically is actually pretty funny how it wound up being a great accident. I've already discussed my love for horror and B movies from the time that I'm, a little kid. And, one of the things that used to happen when I was younger was if I was good, we'd rent a movie from the video store and kind of have movie night. And so one movie night, I was, I guess, specifically good, and I got the chance to pick out a movie, and I tell my mother, I really want to watch The Terminator, which was a completely different movie. I hadn't seen it, but when I was in the video store, I seen the box. So the cover art really spoke to me, and so I really wanted to see that. And I was so disappointed when my mother came home with The Terminator. Mom, I said The Exterminator. Oh, God. And,
I do admit The Exterminator had the much cooler cover if you're like a 10-year-old kid, because that was with the flamethrower, right?
Yep. Exactly. Yep. That's exactly the one. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But then I saw it, and it was, completely captivated me. It had all of the things that, whatever a 8 or 9-year-old me was looking for. It's kind of, looking back on it now, I feel like it's like Friday the 13th, but sci-fi, right? You just, this idea of this unstoppable force coming after you nonstop, no matter what you do to it. And it had a sci-fi kick too. So it was like the combination of horror and sci-fi that I hadn't seen in anything else before. And from the moment the movie started with the battle sequence kind of in the future, I was hooked. And, it's a seminal part of my life. I watch it maybe once a year. Again, it's one of those movies where if it's ever playing on, cable television, I can, regardless of what part of the movie it's in, I can sit back and watch the rest of it. I love it. I don't want to move my camera too much, but if you look next to my TV, you can probably see that I have the poster right next to my television. This is a movie that I absolutely love.
And I think what you were saying is probably why it had such a big impact on me, because it was a horror movie with the sci-fi story. And usually especially for slashers, the justification of the character and what they're doing is usually razor thin, right? Like it's a cursed kind of location. Yeah. They find something and it's really just on the vibes and the visuals.
Revenge.
But with this one, it had such a plot behind it. And it was really terrifying. Like, for me to be under 10 years old and see this movie, there were just certain like shots and the way things were portrayed. Like, I'll say when there's a moment where Sarah's in the truck and she looks out in the distance and she thinks the Terminator is dead and he kills one of the truck. Like for me, that's up there with the shot of Jamie Lee Curtis, like really focus in the frame with Michael Myers rising in the background, because it just created like this context of what a killing machine actually looks like. And I just thought that that really shaped how I viewed horror and movies, just because it broke so many things that I thought were like staples at the time. Like this is like RoboCop, the Jetsons. Like anytime there was like future and robot stuff, it was very good and wholesome or helpful. And this motherfucker was terrifying.
I also, to your point, I think what's even a little bit more terrifying in this respect is that, just like you said, Michael Myers' reason for everything he's doing is revenge, right? Or he's crazy, but also he killed his family. He's been locked up, right? Jason was drowned in a pool. It's all these kind of like petty human motivations to why these guys are on these killing sprees. But the idea that this is just a machine, it doesn't hate you, it doesn't love you, it's just got a job to do.
Doesn't feel pity or remorse.
Scowl, though.
And it absolutely will not stop. I'm sorry, but that was always scary to me.
I saw this movie on TV. I think it was TV or VHS tape, like a couple of years after it came out. And I remember, I think every kid was just blown away by those battle sequences in the future, and also obviously the ending with the endoskeleton, coming after Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese. But I'm more of a horror guy than a sci-fi guy, so I definitely appreciate this aspect of Terminator more so than sort of the action franchise that it became. And I would imagine, I hope that whenever they do this again, they reboot it or remake it or whatever, they kind of lean back into the horror element the way Alien Romulus did. But anyway, let's talk about the movie. So the plot synopsis via ChatGPT goes a little something like this. The Terminator follows Sarah Connor, an unsuspecting woman targeted by a relentless cyborg assassin from the future, sent to kill her before she gives birth to a son destined to lead humanity in a war against machines. Protected by a soldier, also from the future, the story is a race against time, layered with intense action and dystopian dread. Yeah. Okay, I don't know about dystopian dread. Okay, and they don't no mention of the love story there, which is interesting, because as I was watching this, I'm like, I could totally see why James Cameron did Titanic, or why they hired him for Titanic, whichever way.
How cool would it have been if ChatGPT did the whole Karate Kid thing framing that we were saying just a few minutes ago, where it framed the entirety of the film synopsis from the perspective of Skynet?
Yeah. Hey, I'm sure it's prompted. I'm sure it'll do it. So, The Terminator came out on October 26, 1984. And this was a time when futuristic and cyberpunk themes were gaining traction in pop culture. And this was not Jim Cameron's first movie, technically, but this was like, I guess, the first movie that he felt proud of, because he did like a Piranha 2, I think, before this.
Yeah.
And very low budget movie, but this turned out to be a surprise hit. And this really was sort of helped make Arnold Schwarzenegger a big movie star, and also got James Cameron the boost that he needed to become the director he became. Mm-hmm. But so I watched it for the first time from beginning to end earlier today, and I've got like it. Definitely watched it appreciate it from a completely different perspective. But how about you guys? Just watching it over again now, how does it hold up, Dash?
For me, I thought it held up in the scope that it's 40 years old. The effects of projection of the like with the war scenes, where you can see that they're they weren't really using like green screens, but you could see that what was going on in the background was being projected on something to create that effect. The Stan Winston with the animatronics for the end is still a dope scene, and the themes, the writing is just as relevant as ever. So, I mean, I was really happy to put this on. I've watched this consistently throughout the years, but it's still, I think it's still a great movie.
Carlos?
It's a little bit hard for me to be objective about this movie. just because I've loved it for so long. A couple of things watching it most recently that occurred to me is every single shot, and again, I'm sure half of this is the cinematographer, half of it is Cameron. You could take any cell from this movie, any shot, and it just looks iconic. I was specifically thinking about the scene where Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor are in the back of the car, kind of hiding in the parking lot where he's doing, or in the front of the car, but hiding. And both the shots of Kyle Reese speaking and Sarah Connor's response, shots of Sarah Connor walking into the diner where the little kid puts the ice cream in her schmuck. Like every single shot from this movie could be a cell that I would put up on my wall. So again, you got to take my perspective with a little bit of a grain of salt because I just love it so much. I think it absolutely holds up. Another thing that occurred to me is that for a fledgling director, this movie is really tight pacing wise. Mm-hmm. Right, there's not a whole lot of fluff, and even in the beginning, where you're just kind of getting a setup to understand who Sarah Connor is as a person, they still managed to keep the intrigue up with watching Arnold kind of land and his first interactions with humans, watching Kyle kind of get away, put the sneakers on, right? Like then you're learning a little bit more about who she is, and then you're seeing the iconic Arnold kicking the door, waving the 4-4, right, and shoots that lady. And it's a ride that doesn't really have a lot of lulls. Then we switch, to the crazy scene in the club, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't let up on you. And I think that for a young director, the kind of urge to get real flowery is hard. And so I was really impressed by how tight and well paced this movie was. Special effects wise, again, I have a preference for actual non-CG special effects. So I think it all looks good. There's a certain expectation that certain things are not going to look kind of up to snuff, but I don't think anything looked particularly bad. I think this movie held up, and I enjoyed watching it this most recent time as much as I did the first time. One thing that also occurred to me too, against your point, Telly, was in the very beginning. I remember as a kid and as an adult, the way they set you up to start the movie is you see this kind of future war thing. And every so often there's flashbacks to it. And I remember as a kid and I remember as an adult thinking, I wish they would just make this movie. Yeah. Like just in the future, them fighting the war. And then this time it occurred to me, well, they made that movie and it sucked.
Yeah, because they didn't do any of the they didn't do any of the stuff that was in the movie. Yes. There wasn't a scene with the fucking skulls on the floor.
Yes, it wasn't the
purple none of it.
And the grit. I think that's the problem. Like with all the sequels, with it was missing the grit of the first movie, which made it feel so real and visceral. And that's what I really got from watching it over again. Like the cinematography for a low budget movie is so like inventive and ambitious for a low budget movie, because some of the shots and knowing, what goes into kind of setting stuff up, it's like they could have just done something easy and just shot it and just like move on to the next one. But a lot of thought obviously went into this, and the pacing, it's amazing how fast paced it is, considering the plot itself. Just to explain it could be pages and pages of exposition, but it just moves like a rocket ship from beginning to end. And I could only imagine. I envy the people that walked into the theater in 1984 not knowing anything about this movie other than the poster, and kind of that's why I was trying to watch it as when I was rewatching it. Just like I could imagine people not really understanding what the hell was going on in the first 30 minutes. Which is a good thing, where it's like, okay, what's Arnold Schwarzenegger? Like, what's his deal? Is he just a superhuman? Was he something else? What's Kyle Reese want and everything?
But I think that's like the real genius with the movie is the fact that it's like the chosen protagonist of the movie is not who it should be, right? It's not the super cool robot from the future who can't be stopped. It's not the noble future soldier who has a mission to protect someone. It's this like nobody, who we learn all the exposition through her character of like, you know, we know why the Terminator's there when she asks, why does it want me? And I think it's so good, like how it was put together, because that exposition moment is so tense because I mean, it's an info dump. Kyle Reese dumps like, you know, lore on the audience. But what's happening when that's happening is they just escaped one situation. They're being tracked. They have like a real like tight turnaround where they're, you know, they're going from one car to another. The Terminator's after them. Cops are coming. And then you're finding out like the gravity of the situation. And I think the thing that I like about the movie a lot is the locations are pretty bare, or you know, like but the implication of what's happening in the scenes make them so much grander. So just going to a gun shop is like, okay, it's a scene in a gun shop, but when it's a Terminator asking for a specific weapon that doesn't even exist, like everything just has like a multiplier of a little. Just it feels serious.
That scene, I have questions, and maybe if you guys know the answer. I've never been to a gun shop, but do they have live rounds just like laying on the counter like that, or is this maybe like something they did in the 80s?
I assume both.
Because I'm like, okay, like, all right, that doesn't quite make sense. But speaking of, you know, I think like downtown LA, there were like a lot of movies in the 80s had that as a setting, and I thought it really captured that vibe. Love the look of it. But let's talk about the performances. So obviously, watching this over again, I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger is a threatening villain. I just could not quite see how this performance specifically turned him into an action star. So I don't know if you guys disagree, but I just couldn't see like how someone would see him in this movie and say, "Oh, I'm going to make him now the hero in a bunch of action movies."
I think it's in the sense that he can carry and carry in the sense of like name on the thing, a good movie, like just straight up. I think in terms of like when we think about movie stars now, we think of like Tom Cruise, right? And usually when you see Tom Cruise, and if you see like Tom Cruise is in a movie, he's a movie star because it's safe to assume it's probably going to be an enjoyable experience. And I think with this movie being something that was enjoyable, that was like well put together, creative, and just also like good, you know, like with a lot of like, it's a great sci-fi movie, good action. And when you see what he's doing, like the takeaway of usually when you think back at the Terminator, it's the Arnold Schwarzenegger part. So I could totally see someone being like, let's give him another shot. Like, I don't know. I think that like string of movies propelled him to that
yeah. Cause what's interesting is that he goes from Terminator, where he's like, you know, the villain, to becoming like the hero. And also, I just thought it was strange because knowing sort of, you know, 40 years later, Schwarzenegger became a superstar, and watching this again, I'm like, Michael Biehn should have been an A-list star, because his performance is really, I think, at the heart of this film. Because like you were saying, that just that whole scene when he's explaining and doing exposition, if you didn't buy it, if you didn't buy his performance, it just would have sounded like ridiculous, you know. But Carlos, I mean, what's your takeaway from just Arnold in this film?
So, from my understanding of like the background behind that, was that they had been trying to make Arnold Schwarzenegger a bankable star for years before that, just because of the uniqueness of his physique and his stature. But the big concern was the way he spoke, right? The heavy accent. And they had him in a couple of movies before this, playing the hero, and acting as well as Arnold can act, but dubbed. And that was a big hindrance for him, right? And it just looked ridiculous. And so this is the first time that he was in a movie. And granted, it was brilliant to only, you know, give him a few lines. But this is the first time where it was his voice in this movie, himself without any training wheels, and he handled it, you know, well, or at least enough so that the studio execs could feel comfortable giving him other opportunities. Now, to Michael Biehn, first off, hats off to him. He is amazing, and I think it's his acting that. If he was lesser of an actor, it would be a lot easier for everybody, for no one to buy it. You know, the whole story, right? But because he delivers it so well, we believe it, and we understand how Sarah can believe it. And so, yeah, he was amazing, especially in that exposition dump. However, Michael Biehn, although a great and amazing actor, doesn't have that one thing, which, fair or not, he just looks like a typical action, leading actor for the time, right? One of many, right? They could have been, I hate to throw names out there, but again, it could have been Kurt Russell, right? It could have been Christopher Lambert. I don't know. I'm just throwing names out there from movies that we've recently seen, but he's just a handsome, athletic guy.
But I don't think he fit any of the mold of what the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies were. And that's another thing too, because after Terminator, I think the roles that Arnold Schwarzenegger got, like Michael Biehn,
he wouldn't be Conan. Be Conan.
He would be the scrawny guy in Predator. He would be, like there would be
Michael
twins.
Biehn, I don't think would have been sort of like an Arnold Schwarzenegger type of action star, but I could totally see him playing easily playing the role of Connor McLeod, right, or something like that. More of an everyman sort of action hero. But watching this over again, I'm like, he's really like the heart and soul of this movie, because in retrospect, people remember this movie. They're like, oh, it's Sarah Connor's story, but it's really like Michael Biehn. Kyle Reese's story. But
he also plays fear too. That's the thing with
he's scared. Selling the Terminator. He's the hero, but he's also very scared.
Just based on the unique physique, right? Like Lou Ferrigno, they tried to do a little thing, but I think he's hard of hearing or something, and so he had a speech impediment. Right? I think they were looking to try to get these, because again, I think that was also a big leap in the whole bodybuilding sphere, right? That's when Pumping Iron kind of came out. I think it was just a confluence of right time, right place. Yeah. And Hollywood
WWF
was looking for
big, the Rockies. Yeah, it was a lot. It was a big.
Steroids were big, and people have never seen guys that huge, in a movie before. Because back in the day, a guy like Bruce Lee or Charles Bronson, like their physiques would be like, oh, that's amazing, but no one's seen anyone so pumped up that looked like something out of a comic book, So good for Arnold. But and we talk about Michael Biehn, but let's talk about Linda Hamilton. I don't know. I was kind of like hemming and hawing a little bit with her performance. I think she gets stronger at the end, but and I think she's amazing in T2. But I wasn't quite sure of how I felt about her performance in the first movie.
Yeah, I thought she was a little bit passive in this. Like, when I think, and again, like, I think of these as like almost like one movie, the James Cameron Terminator verse, and it's really tough to disconnect this, Terminator 2, because so much of that role is set up in this one. So even like her not even being able to understand Spanish in the first one, and then the second one, she's loading guns, speaking fluent. Like, I think it's just that whole arc. But in this one, she doesn't have like a lot to do. And a lot of the emotions that she's experiencing are also being felt by Kyle, right? Like, he's really fearful and he's good at what he does, so it like has a little bit more gravity than someone who's like, oh my god, I have no idea what's going on, and like really is a blank slate character. But definitely I thought fulfilled the role that you would need as someone who's there, because if you think about like a role, like she could have been really annoying in the sense of like, John Connor in a couple of times with like, his presentation, and I didn't think that she did that. So I thought that she didn't like stand out, but I thought she was great. And then, going into Terminator 2.
Yeah, it served the story for sure in terms of the character. But Carlos, any thoughts on Linda Hamilton's performance?
Yeah, so again, I think it's worth bearing that Linda Hamilton, in her own words, wasn't terribly excited about taking on this role initially. She was trying to make it on Broadway at the time, and again, she considered herself more of a kind of classically trained actress, and now she's doing this low budget sci-fi horror with a bodybuilder. And again, this is like her words from an interview she did in front of Arnold. So it not to say that in like a negative connotation, but considering the space that she was in at the time that she took this role, I think does speak a little bit to the way she played it. To your point about her not being, not excelling, at least in the very beginning, as this every woman, I think it makes sense. If she was, how do you shine like a bright light as an every woman? Right? Like, they purposely made her plain Jane because the idea is that she is supposed to be plain Jane. Now, later on in the movie, I think the turn that she does, again, initially with the fear and her chemistry with Kyle Reese, great. But I think that for me, what really sells it to me is that scene at the very end where they're in the factory and she's like, "Get up, soldier!" right? You know,
Yeah,
on your
that's
feet,
the
soldier. Right?
term.
Like,
And I think going back to what we were all saying about this sort of following some horror tropes, she's essentially the final girl. And usually the final girl is not very interesting. They're kind of bland until the very end where they sort of like, get that inner strength to start to come out to defeat the big monster. Watching this again, I was very surprised to see Lance Henriksen was actually fourth billed.
I knew you were gonna say that.
Yeah,
Yep,
I was like, wow, because I'm a huge Lance Henriksen fan, and everyone knows who's a Terminator fan knows that James Cameron used like Lance Henriksen in like as a proof of concept as a Terminator. It would have been cool to see him as a Terminator too, but the supporting cast, obviously there's Bill Paxton in the beginning and Brian Thompson in the very beginning, the punks that Schwarzenegger kills. No one remembers the third one that he got that jacket from, but some familiar faces throughout the film. Okay, so let's talk about James Cameron, because obviously this is just, if I was running a studio and I saw this film back in the day that was made for a couple $1 million by a no-name director, it would have just like, it would have blew my mind. So, we all have heard stories about how hard he is to work with and everything, but you could see him all over this movie, that this was way more than he needed to do for the type of movie it was and the budget that he had. And you guys are huge James Cameron fans and much more familiar with his filmography than I am. But where do you place the original Terminator in his pantheon of work? Dash.
I mean, it's up there. I think I treat him in two camps. I treat him one as like the writer storyteller one, and then I do another one as like the filmmaker one. So it's not Avatar, one of those movies that really transform the way film is made and the way like computers are integrated. But I think from a story from a story point of view, I think this is up there because I like this story-wise more than Terminator 2. I think it just has so much more implications. All of the cool Terminator lore we get from this movie, all the rules being set up. So the second one is really like this, but bigger, but is just like such a really great example of amazing filmmaking that Terminator 2 usually gets a lot of the praise. But in terms of story, I think this is like one of his best. And overall through his career, you see a lot of the ideas that would be in his movies later start in this one, like the whole idea of the Marines that's done as a Space Marines and Aliens, that's done in all the Avatar movies going forward. The idea of like the machines, the idea of dreams. There was a scene in Aliens that was cut. And also was a scene in Terminator 2 that was cut where they both have visions of the dreams. There's a future sequence in this where it's not even a Michael Biehn flashback. It's her dreaming of what the future is. And she's like, I hear dogs. So he's someone who repeats a lot of the same themes. And it's really interesting to see him execute them very well without CG, without billions of dollars to put behind it, and be able to really get scrappy with the execution of it, and is just a really good display of what as your first film. It's
so
incredible.
Is this the top three for you for James Cameron?
Yes.
Carlos, how about you?
Yeah, I kind of shadow a bunch of what Dash has just said. I feel like Cameron doesn't, I don't want to say he doesn't change or grow. I just feel like the skill set that we know Cameron for, by and large, he's had in his toolkit since this, right? And I feel like subsequent movies that we've seen him make, all kind of do what this movie's doing, just with a bigger budget and more time to kind of play with the tools to make those things. I think this is him in rare form. I think this is him at his best. Some people work really great under stress, and again, considering the budget, considering his experience at the time, like I think this is one of the most prime examples for watching his movies that less is more. Look how much he could do with so little. I also want to give a quick shout out to the creation process for the story. Again, I'm just talking about the filmmaker, but let's talk about
Harlan
he
Ellison?
created the stories. Yeah. So again, when he's asked specifically about where this came from, he says he had a dream of a skeleton chasing him like people do, but this one was all chrome and metal. So we get the iconic Terminator coming out of the fire that Dash referenced earlier. But as far as like the time travel implications, right? There's the Twilight Zone episodes. There's some short stories. But even if he didn't himself necessarily give credit to those things, the fact that those references were playing around in his head, and kind of came out in this story, says to me that there's a certain level of maturity in the sci-fi-ness of it, right? Like it's not just some guy who's like maybe read one thing of sci-fi. Like these are some pretty deep sci-fi concepts, right? Time travel implications, like the whole Messiah complex things. And again, as a burgeoning filmmaker, this is just some really talented A-level execution done by somebody with very little experience and very little budget to do it with. And so for me, this is top notch. Even though I think Terminator 2 is technically a better movie, I feel like this is a more impressive feat of filmmaking.
So
I feel like if this was later, I'm always surprised by the fact that he had to credit Harlan Ellison, especially if it came from like multiple sources. Like I feel like if you look at a George Lucas with Kurosawa's work, if you look at like literally all the Quentin Tarantino work, and I know he's like called out for it at least, but yeah, it's like when I was seeing some of the references, like I watched some of those old Outer Limits episodes because I love Terminator, and I was like, this isn't that close. You know what I mean? I think like, having some of the same imagery, like we just saw John Wick do the Lawrence of Arabia transition from, like these. I'm surprised by it's I guess it's just so happens so regularly now that
Harlan Ellison had a good lawyer, so it's probably that.
No Ideas original, right?
So what's funny watching this movie for the first time in a very long time, and because for the viewers, back in the day, we all used to hang out together. We had a friend whose apartment we used to go to, and basically Terminator 2 was like playing on loop in his house. This is our good friend Carlos, the other Carlos, and having that burned into our brains because of just the repetition, as Terminator being this like crazy, big budget action movie, and then you're watching the original Terminator again many years later. The action is there, but it's nothing like spectacular or something you haven't seen before, but it's very well done. I'm not even sure you would call this an action movie, in a way. This is sort of like a chase movie with like horror elements and some action elements.
It almost feels like a slasher movie with bullets.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, with some car chases. But there's no like, I don't think there's any buildings like blowing up or like helicopters or anything like that. But
just the gas.
So just truck. Because I know everyone loves Terminator 2 for its action, but what is it that you love about Terminator 1?
No, I love the tension in the horror tension. I think is just masterfully done. Like I said, one of my favorite shots is just the moments that you keep having where you think there's a lull. So there's the moment where the Terminator gets he's on the highway and he looks up and then he's run over and you think that's it. So it's it cuts to Sarah. She's trying to help Kyle up, and then she looks over and it's not them, it's not the Terminator front view. This is like, and this is an example of just how a good director is able to just like, it's tough to watch this movie and not feel like it's not a series of deliberate choices. The choice made here was keep the camera far. It's going to be from Sarah's point of view. They think they're done and she sees off in the distance and that, this monster that she thought she stopped is still on the go. And I haven't felt that kind of tension from most horror movies. He's always aware of what you're looking at. It never feels too fast. And each shot works with the preceding one and the one after it.
How about you, Carlos? What's your main sort of attraction to the original Terminator?
One thing I noticed at the very, very beginning is the Terminator's first kill is I think it's Brian Thompson, right? And the way they kind of shot that scene is that it basically, I think Arnold punches through his chest and like lifts him up, right? And kind of the way it was shot, I imagine it would have cost a lot of budget to see his hand actually go through, right? So he does that little thing where right before the impact happens, it cuts to a reaction shot, then it cuts back and you see, so you never actually see the thing happen, but you just your mind kind of fills in the gaps as the way it is. And again, I think that's just another example of some real masterful and artful, kind of guerrilla tactics. And so I think this movie, in relation to Terminator 2, I think is kind of the same dynamic as Alien to Aliens, right? Like this one is a much more claustrophobic. It's us against this monster. We have no one to help us. As a matter of fact, no one even believes that this thing is real, right? And so it's kind of dingily lit. It's not glamorous at all. And the second one, let's just throw $50 million at this problem, right? And now we're going to empower you a little bit. Not only are we going to make the threat bigger, but we're going to empower you a little bit by giving you your own Terminator to fuck with, right? To help protect it. So that becomes a little bit more of an action thing because the stakes between the good guys and the bad guys are a little bit more even. So you get to see a lot more kind of action-y stuff happen where this is more of a hide and seek kind of scenario. The stakes are so piled in the Terminator's favor that there is no stand and fight this thing. There is get away, and if we can try to like harm him on our exit, then by all means. And so that leads, it just becomes a lot more scary in that respect, which is why I think horror tropes speak more in this one than in T2 because the stakes, the difference between the good guys and the bad guys is a lot bigger in this one.
Yeah, and T2 is obviously much more of a bigger commercial film. Also, I don't think you could get away with some of the stuff that would happen here. Even like Linda Hamilton being naked, also topless. Yeah.
But I was going to say that the characters also have to find other stuff to do in 2 because it's not enough, right? Like by 2, they're trying to stop the war. They get they're in a place where they can leave. They got to, trying to reset the chip because there was just, you could only have these 2 Terminators fight for so long,
Well, I mean, one thing I don't want to sound like the softie here, but I thought rewatching this again, I brought this up earlier. Just I really was impressed by the love story that James Cameron tells in this, because that's, I mean, I guess with his later films that became more prevalent, but I think at the heart of this is that story between Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese, which I thought was done really well and just cheesy and melodramatic enough that it's emotional, but not kind of
but also
cheesy.
the mind fuck behind it too. Like, when it hits you that like, oh wow, I sent my dad back not only to make sure that my mom doesn't get killed, but also to make sure that he porks my mom so that I could be born. Right?
I was thinking of that. I was thinking with the revisionist history, maybe John Connor sends Kyle Reese back to impregnate Sarah Connor, not so much protect her from the Terminator.
Or a little bit of A or B, but the concept that that's kind of a throwaway idea. It's not super focused on in the movie itself, except for like one kind of reveal kind of at the end. But think about like how many throwaway romantic subplots in some of these movies are there that don't have the kind of pull that this does, and are take up a major point in the movie. That one of my issues, I like the love subplot, but again, and I get that it has to happen so quick, but it's like the savior of the world manifests from a love that occurs from 2 people that know each other for all of 36 hours.
Right.
And, their real love is just basically because, fear, that adrenaline you get when your life is in danger and, you've both survived.
Well, it goes downhill after the first 36 hours. So I thought, dramatically speaking, it's like perfect.
That's fair enough.
and again, just like watching this again and just seeing the connective tissue between this and Titanic, which is, again, another love story like that's set, maybe 2 days, 3 days in total.
But he wasn't sent back in time. It's a whole different thing.
They needed cyborgs on the Titanic.
Leo DiCaprio is no Kyle Reese.
No, I think that's the thing that makes it so much bigger, because all of the things it is a love story, but there's also so much more. It is the fate of the world. It is this predetermined destiny, like literal thing. It's are we in a time loop, right? Is he his father now? Was he always his father? Was that why he was sent back? And I think that love Terminator 2, but for me, like just those implications was something like, for a 8-year-old to think about for the first time. And
Yeah.
all of the really good like time travel stories, 12 Monkeys, the episodes of Star Trek. There's been so many like
even
time
Back to the
loop.
Future. Yeah, your head hurts. I remember having conversations with like friends in school after seeing Terminator, and it would just like I mean, your mind can't conceive it. It just doesn't.
That's why
You
it's
just have to go.
paradox.
Yeah, you just have to go with it.
Time paradox.
And that was what was good with this one, where it was actually a lean in on the, either the paradox or the like closed time loop,
Mhm.
which is, kind of a similar to spoiler, 12 Monkeys, where it was like there's not too many of them, where Back to the Future, the Avengers, Endgame, they're very in the flexible timeline, right? Like, you can go back and change something and it actually changes. It didn't really it suggests that in Terminator 2 that you can change the future, but then everyone's
No favorite
favorite
what we make.
yeah, but then everybody's favorite part in Terminator 3 was when he saves John Connor, and it turns out his whole thing was to make sure that they couldn't stop the war, and everybody was like, this is the shit, because I think like we all kind of like that predetermined. I think it's why like there's so many prequels, and that was, I think for me, seeing this movie as a prequel was very, the first time I saw the Terminator chip was with Dyson in part 2, with the thing.
So
and
you
then I
didn't get
got
the
to
callback.
see the, how it happened, which was so nuts.
Yeah, I think one of the issues with the later movies, especially after like, I think after part 3 or something like that, if they became so focused on the time travel aspect, and that's really just a setup in this first movie. It doesn't harp on like how they a bunch of robots created a time machine or how even time travel works. You just kind of go with it.
I will say this with the time travel in this one, they do set this up really hard as a one and done movie. So the whole they justify the they didn't say how they came up with it, but the whole idea is that mankind has defeated Skynet. They're gonna win,
and then we smash it.
The very last moment before they destroyed, it's like a Hail Mary pass, and no one else can come through, and no one else. And the weak point in all the Terminator movies going forward, and I'll say they don't talk about it really at all for part 2, so you can forgive it. But later on, they have to justify why is this date keep moving, right? Like, Judgment Day keeps getting extended, and then they have to keep figuring out like who's sending all of these things, why they send, and it's a little bit tough to avoid with that many stories and each new iteration. Even the anime tries to like go, they've put their own spin on the time travel rules. But
so on that note, as I was watching this again and watching the ending, I was like, it would have been great if there was no sequels after this movie, because this would have been one of those movies that you could have what if to death. Like, what if they did make a sequel? What it would have been like?
I can't follow you. I cannot follow you down this dark path.
This is hypothetically. This is hypothetical. Okay,
this is dark Telly.
So follow me here. I want to talk about the series and the entire franchise, because obviously T2 is a great movie. It definitely deviates a lot from just the tone and everything of the first movie. But what are your guys' thoughts on just the overall Terminator film franchise? Are any of the sequels after part 2 worth a shit?
Parts of subsequent movies are worth a shit.
Like which?
However, not so. 3, like Dash mentioned, the ending, that whole idea of like, gotcha, right? That they had like an M. Night Shyamalan-esque kind of ending that I think was really cool. And then 4 was the one with Salvation, right? Is that the one with the John Connor? So there were some cool action sequences in that. And again, the idea that we're watching the forming of the Alliance, or at least John Connor's part in that, was like cool, but it was just like everything else around it kind of was whack. Then the one with this girl from
Genesis.
Genesis,
from Game of Thrones.
Yo, the first like hour of that movie was so cool, man. I was bought in. And then all of a sudden, I guess you're right, the time travel kind of portion jumped in and it just kind of ruined this for me. There was cool sequences in this one where they brought back Sarah Connor. Dark Fate. But by and large, and now they're trying to. This most recent one was where they're trying to do alternate like versions of Skynet, again playing around with the rules, right? Having the Terminator that could split into two separate Terminators, both the liquid and the metal. Like now you're just like, all right, guys, some cool way. But I just want to throw in there one thing that, as far as little bits that we were talking about earlier that make them film great, that I just wanted to mention before we move on was, whenever the Terminator perspective vision is the first time I ever seen that in any other movie, like the heads up display that the Terminator sees when he's scanning stuff, I thought was such a cool little touch, right? Because now I want to walk around and in my head I'm doing the little scanning thing. And another little tidbit that I thought was really cool.
I wonder if that was the first movie to can't imagine that would have been the first movie to do something like that, but that was the first movie the way it did it.
What's also really cool is that when they go into that mode, everything is slowed down slightly. If you notice, because again, I guess the idea is that his reflexes are so fast, he's processing information. So like when he's going through the police station, that famous shootout in the police station, if you notice, like all the gunshots are a little bit slower. Everybody's kind of moving in slow motion because to him, everyone is kind of moving in slow motion because he's the fucking Terminator. I thought that was really interesting. I'm sorry to derail everything, but I didn't want to get...
Okay. But Dash, what are your thoughts on just the overall franchise, the film franchise? I know there's so much other media, but...
So it's funny because whenever I see these Star Wars fans who are like, they my childhood and like, you know, all of these things, Terminator 3 was the first like real heartbreak that I ever experienced. And I waited so long for this movie and it was so disappointing. But again, like, I feel like it's kind of like Aliens or like Blade, where you're like, how do you mess this up? Right. Like you know, the pieces that need to be in one of these movies. And to Carlos's point, and they're all the things that I would echo. There's really good things in each of them that are just like, you know, something that's a really cool like time travel trope, something that's like a war trope, but each one seems like they don't understand what people love about Terminator and they focus on like weird stuff. So it's like not the beginning of Skynet. It's like, oh, let's have this like relationship between John and Kyle and some random person. That's the thing to focus on. And, you know, they go into a Terminator factory, but that's not like the important part. It's like this other thing. So they're always kind of like missing the mark.
What would you say was the best sequel outside of 2?
So I would say the Terminator Zero, the Netflix show is
out of the films. Yeah.
Out of the films, I would say Dark Fate.
I thought you were going to say Sarah Connor Chronicles.
I would. Okay. That would be the one after the anime. But just because they have a lot of really cool ideas and they execute them well. But the thing that I liked about Dark Fate was they explore some of the ideas of like, what does a Terminator do when it finishes its mission? Right, that's the whole
right. But it contradicts everything that was said in the first movie, where they don't feel pity, they don't whatever.
But he's a learning computer.
He's a learning machine. The more contact he has with the humans, the more he learns.
And he's married to a woman who just I don't know. But anyway, but Carl, what's your favorite sequel outside of the second one? Because obviously, if anyone says that any other sequels other than Part 2 is the best Terminator sequel, they're out of their minds. But
yeah.
So is Dark Fate the most recent one, or is it the other one with the
Dark Fate was when John Connor gets killed in the beginning?
Yeah, that's the one with the Terminators that split too. That's the same.
Oh, it's the same movie. It's the same movie. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's right. That's okay. That makes sense. That one because. Of all of the things that I find egregious in other ones, there are less of those things in Dark Fate because there's like less moments where I'm like, fuck, really? This is what we're doing? And I feel like 3 and 4 had those things.
So there's a part in 3 where he has like the star
glasses.
I'm like, this can't be my favorite movie.
Come on.
When you watch 3 again, or think about 3 and with like side by side with the first movie, you're just like, what the hell were they thinking?
The Terminatrix.
But it did go into camp like in the later sequels because there's like the jokes, like in Genesis, there was all those like sort of like winks at the camera. And
but Genesis, I'll tell you again, if Genesis would have continued past hour one in the same speed and pace that it had up to it, that would have been my that would have been an easy call. It just goes so downhill.
The thing that's crazy about this franchise that's different than every other franchise is, especially the ones that do the prequels, is they have information that they need to lead up to. Like all the other ones are like, oh, we're going to, Star Wars, they tell their own story and then they go back and then they lead up to it. This one, between the first two Terminator, they're like, here you go. Here's all the lore of what will happen. And they're like, I don't know.
It seems like it's they're kind of like stuck in because the rules are established and it's expectations that come with the franchise. It's kind of like with Halloween when you think about it, because with Halloween it's like the movie has to take place on Halloween, right? So you can only tell a specific type of
Halloween
story.
on Thanksgiving,
right? Exactly. So the same thing with Terminator. Okay, it's all about Judgment Day, and they just move the dates around. But I think like I can't really say which one is my favorite. I remember seeing Terminator 3 and being like, "What is this? This is like a crappy remake of the second movie." And the only thing I really liked about Terminator 3 was the final scene at the end when they're in that bunker and all of a sudden they realize, okay, the shit's hitting the fan. But I think Salvation. I feel like that's the one that at least. I feel like they tried to do something different, which didn't quite work, because that was supposed to be the movie that has the future war, but it looks nothing like the one that's in the first movie. So I don't know why. I wish someone would make the future war movie that's teased in the first film, but use like 80s like practical effects and get that.
And even the second film too.
Yeah.
The second film war scenes are incredible. And that beginning of Terminator 2, it's masterpiece. Masterpiece.
It's funny because when I was watching the first movie again, I forgot that like the endoskeleton wasn't in the battle sequences in the flashbacks. Because I always just burned in my brain like that scene from Terminator, the opening of Terminator 2, where it looks at the camera, and I always thought that was in the first movie, and it isn't. So,
but I mean, think about that. I mean, because one, that would have been like a real big revealing it way too early.
The ending,
But I mean, that must have been like such a mindfuck, and it's tough for me to think about Terminator 2 having not seen it first, because there's two things. One, I just think about the fact that imagine you see the end of the first Terminator, right? Like all of that with one, and then the second movie starts and like, here's 30 of them doing that thing. Crazy. But also the fact that originally they didn't want to reveal that Arnold Schwarzenegger was bad in the second one, and you're not supposed to know until Get Down.
And when you watch that scene in that context now, you're like, that would have been so goddamn amazing if they would have just let him rock.
Entertainment Tonight and all the hype leading up to Terminator 2, so they already kind of established that he was like the hero, so it kind of ruined all that. But
because he's the bankable star.
I know that was supposed to be a reveal, but one of my pet peeves though with Terminator 2 is like when they just throw each other around, and I realized that's also in the first movie where you don't just like strangle the person; they have to like throw them around first.
Yeah,
that's into the dude in the bed in his undies and his tidy whities.
I guess you have no choice, but you just have to kind of push each other around. But okay,
he's like, "Look, man, I already punched the hole in a dude 20 minutes ago.
You gotta, it can't be just him like snapping X, otherwise it would be like a Jason movie.
Yeah.
The release, as I mentioned, this came out October 26, 1984. It was made on a budget approximately of $6.4 million, which is like
nothing.
Incredible to think about now. And it made $78 million worldwide. And it went from this low budget movie that probably no one really had very high expectations of to this complete game changer of a film that has become a classic.
But I don't think initially, right? Like I don't think it was like a box office hit in the media, right? I think it's one of those that got more.
I think. I want to say from doing some research, it probably got all like positive reviews, which is rare for a genre movie like this. So I think it was riding a lot of buzz, and the fact that because it's also crazy to think that they put $100 million into Terminator 2, which is a sequel to this like ultra low budget movie from the early 80s.
I mean, again, that's just because Schwarzenegger was on such a high at that time.
Yeah, well, it was the number one movie at the box office.
Yeah.
Oh,
so I don't know if it comparatively, what the numbers were, but it beat every other movie that came out that week. So,
but I wonder, if Schwarzenegger did not become a big star, I guess there wouldn't have been a Terminator 2. And if they
'Cause
did,
again-
and if they did a Terminator 2, it would have been very different than the one we got.
to Dash's
obviously.
point, it kind of ends, right?
Yeah.
Like it ends as it should. You
Yeah,
know.
but I mean, I do wonder because like it seemed like they didn't know what they were going to do with that Alien franchise, and whatever he did with that, he definitely built some goodwill to at least like get like a passion project later. I mean, his track record was just like hits after hits, but I assume like also too just from like a studio point of view of being able to like follow up something that was iconic with something new, like just the demonstration of what you can do to, you know, to help a studio, and like just the type of asset that he could be is like has to be unreal.
Yeah, when it's James Cameron, the passion project is probably going to be pretty bankable. So yeah, I'm giving it all to Arnold, but yeah, you're absolutely right. The combination of Arnold and Cameron at that time, you know, I'm surprised they didn't give him more money.
Because I think even the idea of like being able to save, like not save, but like to continue like a moneymaker, like we give a lot of praise to Terminator 2 for being 7 years out as a sequel. I think it's also a similar amount of years because I think Alien 79 to Aliens, which is 86, like another 7 years of like game. Like I would call the sequel a game changer in the franchise. That's I don't know what other, like even now we're praising like, you know, Alien Romulus and like Prey, but those movies are getting back to what was done. You know, they're not like really like creating. The way that even if you just think about like the escalation from Alien to Aliens and Terminator to Terminator 2, I was going to say Terminators. You could just imagine like I'm sure studios were just like, yo, take whatever. You know, like I think, and the fact that he was supposed to do, I think, what was it, like Spider-Man? I think he was supposed to, like, you can totally see the wheels turning of give this guy any property,
anything he wants,
and say,
for sure. So let's talk about the critical reaction to the movie. So on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 100%, and then an 89% audience score. How do you pronounce the tomato meter? The tomato, 100% on the tomato meter and 89% on the audience score. IMDb has a 8.1 out of 10 and Letterboxd 3.9 out of 5. Some critical reviews from, I don't know if this was when it came out or a couple of years in later on, but the New York Times said this is a monster movie and the monster's role fits Mr. Schwarzenegger just fine. The Globe and Mail, which I think is in Canada, they said it's an efficient, cold-blooded sci-fi splatter movie that never makes the mistake of forgetting that on some level it is deeply ridiculous. Which I don't quite get that though, because they take it very seriously. There's no.
I mean, but also no one's seen a metal skeleton at that point going through a fire that's a nonstop killing machine. So I mean, I consider the time, right? Like,
but there are no like. I don't feel like are there any like jokes or like any kind of like light moments in the movie? I don't feel like there really are. At least I can't like immediately remember them. Other than like the beginning, you know, what is the silly 80s tropes of the stupid, you know, sex crazed young people, you know.
I think the Lance Henriksen's like always getting cut off every time.
He said, "Shut up." He tells him to shut up.
All right.
Yeah, that is
okay.
That's probably it. And also, I wish that they had like a spin-off movie like Seven, like just these two cops. I would watch like 3 seasons of that.
I know they were trying to get Lance Henriksen back for the third movie, Terminator 3, which didn't work out. They said he was going to be in a wheelchair, but didn't work out.
Sarah Connor getting prank called with the dirty phone call was kind of funny. And then homeboy uses as soon as the roommate gets on the call, he goes in the same script again. That was pretty.
I will say that I saw this in like one of those midnight IFC screenings, and the part where Arnold Schwarzenegger goes, "Sarah Connor," and the woman goes, "Yes," and he just pushes the door and people were crying, laughing.
Well, it's funny how they shoot that scene because it's like in slow motion and it's like so dramatic.
And the juxtaposition of like it's like daytime in America, right? Small town, right? She's thinking she's getting the milkman and some shit, and here comes fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's all slow motion.
It's such a big moment, and it's because it feels so silly to make that so big. But I think it's the
one iconic though. I love it.
Yeah.
One observation I wanted to make, not related to the critical reaction, but you know what? What always bothered me. So when they get to the motel, and he's like, "Hey, I'll be right back. I'm gonna go get supplies."
Oh yeah.
He comes back still wearing the fucking bum pants. Like, he's had days of opportunities to change his pants from the pair that he stole from this homeless guy, and he wears them to the last frame.
Yeah, that's something I was obsessing with that I never caught in the first time I watched it. I'm like, those pants that he gets off that bum must be so gross and disgusting.
And rank.
And he was in the department store. He could have easily, got some sweatpants,
all right.
threw them on.
So maybe you guys can help me with what my question is. At the end of that chase scene, right before Kyle Reese gets arrested and Sarah Connor gets arrested, right? Mm-hmm. They're having the chase scene and the Terminator smashes into the wall, right? Sarah Connor hits the brakes so they don't die. And the big kind of reveal is that the Terminator disappears.
Yeah.
Right? He turned around, he's gone.
Yeah.
But the Terminator had no reason to disappear at that moment. He could have completed his mission and killed all those fucking cops.
Yeah, I think he wanted to fix his shit up.
Fix his eye.
He's vain, so.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Not like this. Not like this.
He had to fix his hair. He had to cut his hair.
Don't look at me. I'm hideous.
And but so another thing we like to do is also get some recent fan takes of the movie and what people think today. So I went on IMDb, looked up two recent reviews, one positive, one negative. So this comes from Gen Paridi from October of 2024. The Terminator is a sci-fi classic that's mostly held up extraordinarily well. It's a blast from the past that I still love after watching it so many times. As for the sequels, well, the first one is amazing. The rest are a different story. 100% agree.
Yeah.
And then here's a 1 out of 10 star review from a Belize Mildenhall. And he says, or he or she says, hoping he never comes back. I feel sorry for people that watched movies 40 years ago. I'm just glad that I was born in more modern times. The acting from all parts is horrendous. The writing is dreadful. The plot is bland, and the story deserved to only the story deserved to not be insulted. The special effects, which were groundbreaking at the time, now appear laughably outdated. The action sequences lack the sophistication and intensity of modern films. Even the iconic score feels overdone. While the Terminator may hold nostalgic value for some, it doesn't resonate with me. It's a relic of its time that fails to impress by today's standards.
I remember when I had my first beer.
Okay. It's funny when you talk to young people
Mildenhall.
When you talk to really young people that watch old movies now, and this is sort of their take on it, they'll laugh at the special effects or maybe the haircuts. The hairstyles also are horrendous in this movie, as was what Arnold Schwarzenegger was wearing. But that's a.
We also didn't spend any chance to talk about the score.
Yes,
I just want to say classic, right? And simple, just the knocking, the dun 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 dun, just the. Mwah, chef's kiss, the music in the scene in the club, right? Just all of it expertly done.
Score is iconic for sure, and the beauty of the score is that it sets that tone of this is sort of a military kind of film, but Brad Fiedel is able to use do the love version of that during the love scene between Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese, which
it's no Queen
amazingly well. Yes.
It's just so strange, hearing this review because recently there was a movie that had to do with AI and machines and cyborgs, and the effects were amazingly well done, and the movie wasn't that good and it wasn't memorable. And here's a movie that we're celebrating 40 years later, and in terms of effects and I feel like a movie like The Creator, I think those effects will hold up probably for another 40 years without people saying oh, this looks like crap. I think we're at that point now where you can put a movie out and you won't notice too much as long as you're not doing anything too out of control.
The Creator is no Terminator.
It's not, and it just goes to show how far effects can take you, because you can have something that looks amazing and just has no heart, nothing you think about once you leave the theater. So it's really interesting because I just try to think of a movie in the last 5 years that had a catchphrase. And I know we're like in a different time, but like a catchphrase or launched a career like similar to an Arnold Schwarzenegger or a director to go on. Like the only person that I could maybe think about that's very comparable to this is like a Christopher Nolan. When you start to see like Memento and some of his older movies, you start to see a lot of those that like dude loves time, right? Like Tenet, Interstellar. You see a lot of those ideas going forward, but like, you know, how many of those in the last, you know, X amount of time, so to see, like,
you got to go on TikTok for the
I take issue too with James Cameron and Arnold both saying that they never intended "I'll be back" to be a catchphrase. But if you look at the way the shot is framed, like it pans out, he turns around, he pans out, like it stops. He turns around, he says it. And then, come on, guys.
Well, you know, the way he delivers it, though, is not very iconic, but people have misremembered it, so they kind of add extra to it. They're like, I'll be back.
They add extra Arnold to it.
He just says, I'll be back. And he tries to sound like normal, but everyone that remembers it, it's kind of like, you know, the Darth Vader line or whatever. Everyone kind of remembers it in a different way.
Yeah, but then they went extra hard at part 2. They were like, "Hasta la vista," am I right, guys? Yeah. We're all saying it, right, guys?
Yeah. So, anyway, let's give this a rating. So, Dash.
Are we not gonna do favorite scenes?
Oh, okay. Let's do. Sorry, skip that. Yeah, favorite scenes. Carlos, you start.
My favorite scene is the scene in the club. Just so expertly done. You know, she ducks down, right? Arnold is walking by, looks right there. The whole what's going to happen, the slow motion, the smoke behind them, the music playing, the laser sight from the gun about to, you know, hit her and the, you know, catch her right. And then the shootout. Just every single part of that sequence was masterful, and I absolutely love it.
Mine is one of the future sequences. I think it's real again, like Terminator 2 had that really cool beginning, but the one where they actually go to like the human base and then one of the Terminators infiltrates it, and you get enough of the background to know that this is probably like a 600 model. So they give you like a lot of the context of growing up in the ruins. There's like body disposal units of people that have to like throw their friends out. The dogs. I didn't realize this until watching it today. The Terminator shoots the dog. Like, you know, there's dog barking and then it just cuts off. The kids, like, you know, looking at the thing, you think they're watching TV. They're just watching like a flame in the thing. He has the photo that you'll find later, which is like, you know, just a really cool moment. And I think rewatching it as a kid, the second time was like when you see that and all of the things that you'll see later coming into view. It was just a version of the future. Want to give the reason why we're doing all this shit, right? To avoid that, you know, in the future, but also just I just hadn't seen it portrayed that way before. Like it's just usually flying cars, everything's great, you know, things recycle themselves, and it was like, nah, motherfucker, we living in rubble, watching flames on TV.
Great pick, man. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Telly?
Acting wise, I love the just the first couple scenes with just Kyle Reese trying to figure out where he is and just
what year
around. Yeah, love that. But from I guess an effects standpoint, I loved what they did just with the you know the endoskeleton at the end, because the combination of stop motion and the puppetry and just the way that puppet moved in terms of it looked really good. You know, it just looked so natural, like the head movements and then the way that.
Well, I mean, by nature too, right? Like it could stop motion looks robotic, so stop motioning a robot.
Well, no, I don't mean I don't mean to stop. Like I mean the more close up, the tighter shots when you just kind of see the head turning and then all that kind of stuff. I just thought it was just a great combination of effects, of different techniques and everything, and the dread that was there, because I remember seeing that for the first time. I was like, holy shit, this thing is not going to stop, you know, and those wonderful misdirects, which just come straight out of a horror movie where you think the killer is dead. And especially after that first, when they blow him up the first time, and you think, oh, he must be dead, because you don't know that it's going to rise up as a robot. I could have just imagined being in a theater in 1984, seeing that. And just seeing that
you're ready to get up
robot emerging. Oh my god!
And then,
holy shit! Yeah. So,
and also when it's just the chassis too, because then there's another one like right after where they blow him up again, and you're like, all right, the music comes in, and it's like, nah, man, we got one more.
No, it's amazing. It's wonderful. All right. Well, yeah, let's get to the rating. So, Carlos, the Terminator.
So I am tempted to give this a perfect score because in many ways it is for me a perfect movie. However, you can't do better than perfect. And for me, I think Terminator 2 is the perfect movie. So by virtue of Terminator 2 being slightly better than Terminator 1, I'm going to give Terminator, the original, a 4.5 fuck you assholes out of 5.
Insane. Well, I can love multiple movies, or else it'll only be 1.5 for me, right? And then everything else can only achieve a 4.5. But in terms of my 5, which means I love it, I'll always watch it. I think it's a fantastic movie. I'm going to give this 5-phased plasma rifles in a 40-watt range out of 5. This
all right,
movie
fuck it. You know what?
It's a classic.
It's a 5. Fuck it. It's a 5. Fuck it.
I'm going to give this 4 dirty children watching a burning television set out of 5.
What's on?
Yeah. No, I just thought that was funny. I guess that was the director coming out of James Cameron, because those scenes just made no sense at all, but it just looked cool, you know? So, yeah, because I just imagine the burning plastic and everything, probably very, very toxic, but yeah, it was a funny shot. This is not a movie I go back to and rewatch a lot, but just watching it again, I really appreciate the filmmaking and the talent and the genius behind James Cameron. Regardless of what people say about him, you can't deny that with a movie like this, with just a couple $1 million doing what he did with this movie and turning it into a $1 billion franchise. It's and forget about just the money, the profit part of it, but just from an artistic filmmaking standpoint, it's kind of mind blowing just to see what a talented filmmaker could do with little resources, but tons of passion.
And it's tough. Like I just imagine being on set, and I know like people like it's difficult, but imagine someone's like, they see this, right? Mm-hmm. And you come up there and you're like, yo man, what if we move this light here? It's like, hell no. Like, you know what I'm trying to do here? And I think there's that thing where I think Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was like, oh, you know, I think it grammatically, it doesn't make sense. I should say, I will be back. He's like, no man, just say this shit.
Trust me.
Well, I could totally see James Cameron being a complete asshole on set, and then when this movie comes out and becomes the big hit it was, just him like just sort of like dancing around saying, I told you motherfuckers, you know. So
they said that he did that for to a degree on Aliens because the British crew didn't want to work with him because it wasn't he wasn't American and just work. I mean, it wasn't English, and he worked in a completely different manner than Ridley Scott, and he was like, you know, very Back to the Future, like, look at this.
Yeah,
put the Terminator on, and he was like, yo, I can do this shit. And they were like, all right, you know, we'll make, we'll lift these
concessions. Yes, for sure. Okay, well,
because I mean, I would feel so secure of like, oh, this dude can do that.
All right, well, that's our 40th anniversary special on the Terminator. If you haven't seen it yet, something's wrong with you. It's 40 years, motherfucker. It's funny that in this movie they don't have any concept of the internet yet or artificial intelligence, and it's just funny that a cyborg from 40 years later, which is like, is it our time?
Like today?
What
it was
year?
like a couple years ago.
Okay, a couple of years ago. There's no concept of the internet yet or anything like that, but
they do say stuff like it'll be plugged into everything, making so it's like I do find it really interesting that there's, even though we didn't have the words for it, I think that like really good sci-fi still predicted the functionality of what technology would eventually become, even if it's not called the internet. They were like, it's going to be connected. You know, we're connecting stuff. So definitely ahead of its time.
All right. Well, maybe that's the future. That's our fate. Our machines, self-aware
None but
machines.
what we make.
Yes. Oh well. I look forward to that. That's gonna be a lot of fun. I hope I'm alive for the robot apocalypse.
We know the first person watching a flame on TV.
Let me be.
You couldn't even
get out of the way. Let me watch
on a flat screen. You couldn't even fit
Yeah. All right. So thank you all for tuning in to this very special episode of Shoot Punch Kick. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more breakdowns of 80s and 90s cinematic violence. See you on the next one.